Nobody wanted the humans. That was the simple truth of it. The rejection notice came in 17 different languages, each translation saying the same thing: economically unviable, technologically primitive, resource burden. The Galactic Consortium had reviewed humanity's application for settlement rights and found them lacking in every measurable category. Danny Reyes read the notice 3 times before crumpling it into a ball and throwing it at the recycling unit. She missed. The paper bounced off the wall and rolled under a pipe that had been leaking for 6 months. Nobody had fixed the leak because nobody had the parts, and nobody had the parts because nobody wanted to trade with humans. That bad? Old Patel asked from the doorway. He was 73 years old and had been 73 for the entire 4-year journey from Earth. Space travel did strange things to aging. Worse, Danny said. They offered us dust 7. Patel's weathered face showed no reaction. He had survived too much to be surprised by cruelty anymore. The mining slag planet. Former mining slag planet. They stripped it bare 200 years ago and left it to rot. Danny kicked at a loose floor panel. They're hoping we'll die quietly so they don't have to process more paperwork. The steadfast hope carried 12,000 humans, the last organized group to leave Earth before the ecological collapse made the journey impossible. They had spent 4 years crossing the void between galaxies, burning through fuel reserves, recycling their water until it tasted like rust, and dreaming of a new beginning. Instead, they got garbage. Riku found Danny in the engine room an hour later. The teenager had been born on the ship and had never known anything but metal walls and recycled air. She was brilliant in the way that children of desperation often were, learning 3 engineering disciplines by age 15 simply because there was nothing else to do. The council accepted the offer, Riku said. Danny's hands stopped moving over the engine diagnostic panel. They what? Old Patel convinced them. He said something about Earth, about how our ancestors built civilizations from worse. Our ancestors had breathable air and water that didn't kill them. He also said, we don't have a choice. That was the part Danny hated most. Patel was right. The steadfast hope had maybe 6 months of functionality left. The fusion core was stable, but the distribution systems were failing. They could keep the lights on, or they could keep the air clean, but eventually they wouldn't be able to do either. Dust 7 or death. Some choice. The planet lived up to its name. From orbit, it looked like someone had taken a gray ball and beaten it with hammers. Craters overlapped craters. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. The soil was so contaminated with heavy metals that nothing should grow there for another 1,000 years. Beautiful, Riku said flatly as they descended through the haze. Danny was too busy keeping the landing thrusters from exploding to respond. They sat down near an abandoned orbital station that hung in low atmosphere, too broken to achieve proper orbit and too valuable to let fall. The consortium had stripped it of anything useful decades ago and left the skeleton behind. Within hours, humans spread across the landing zone like ants discovering a picnic. They were scavengers by necessity now, picking through the wreckage of greater civilizations for scraps. Danny found the first gift in the station's garbage compactor. IT was a power cell, ancient design, covered in corrosion and officially listed as depleted. Every species in the consortium had the same power cells. They used them for about 50 years, then threw them away when efficiency dropped below 90%. Danny Pride opened the casing with a screwdriver she'd made from a broken antenna. Inside, the crystalline matrix was still intact. The cell wasn't dead. It was just dirty. 200 years of particulate buildup had clogged the energy transfer surfaces. Any civilization with proper tools would have cleaned it in seconds. Humans didn't have proper tools. Humans had vinegar, baking soda, and stubbornness. 3 hours later, the cell was running at 87% efficiency. Not perfect, but enough to power a small HAB unit for a decade. There are thousands of these, Riku said, staring at the glowing cell. The station's full of them. The whole planet's full of them, Danny corrected. This was a dumping ground. Everything the consortium didn't want ended up here. So we're living in a garbage heap. Danny smiled for the first time in months. No, we're living in a gold mine. We just need to teach everyone else how to see it. Old Patel found them at sunset, Though sunset on dust, 7 was just a slightly different shade of gray. He was carrying a leather pouch that he'd protected throughout the entire journey from Earth. Seeds, he explained, opening the pouch to show them. Végétables, fruits, grains. Everything we need to start over. The soil here is poison, Riku said. So is half of Earth by the end. We learned to clean it. Patel closed the pouch carefully. Bacteria from our own bodies. It sounds disgusting, but it works. We made the soil live again once. We can do it again. Danny looked at the old man, then at the young girl, then at the gray wasteland stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, 12,000 humans were building shelters from scrap metal and hoping tomorrow would be better than today. They had been rejected by the galaxy, thrown away like the broken power cells and corroded machinery that littered this forsaken world. But thrown away things had a funny habit of becoming useful again, at least when humans were involved. Let's get to work, Danny said. The Sindari trader ship descended through Dust 7's atmosphere, expecting to find corpses. Advisor Melian had been assigned this inspection as punishment. Her superiors wanted her to witness the failure of yet another primitive species, to file the death certificate, and to learn humility. 18 months was more than enough time for humans to realize their mistake and die of it. What she found instead made her question everything she had been taught. The settlement was ugly. That was the first thing Melian noticed. Humans had taken apart their colony ship and rebuilt it horizontally, creating sprawling structures of mismatched metal and salvage panels. Nothing was beautiful. Nothing was elegant. Everything looked like it had been assembled by children playing with broken toys. But everything worked. Melian stepped out of her shuttle and immediately noticed the smell. It wasn't the toxic stench she expected from a mining slag planet. It was something else, something organic. Growing things. Welcome to Penny Station, a young human said, approaching with a smile. I'm Riku. You're here for the inspection. Melian stared at the fields behind the girl. Green plants were pushing up through soil that should have been lethal. Irrigation channels carried water that should have been poison. And humans moved between the rows. Tending crops like this was the most normal thing in the world. How? Melian asked. Riku's smile widened. Would you like the tour? The answer, as it turned out, was bacteria. Humans had cultivated microorganisms from their own digestive systems. Organisms that could break down heavy metals and transform toxic soil into something fertile. The process had taken months of trial and error, countless failures, and several humans getting very sick. But it worked. This is impossible, Melian said, watching a human farmer harvest vegetables that shouldn't exist. The contamination levels here were measured at Category 7. Nothing survives Category 7. We didn't survive it, the farmer said cheerfully. We fixed it. The tour continued. Melian saw power cells running at efficiencies that the consortium had declared impossible. She saw machines rebuilt from components that had been thrown away centuries ago. She saw humans trading labor for what other species consider garbage and somehow turning that garbage into wealth. Danny Reyes found them near the central workshop. The human engineer was covered in grease and carrying a device that looked like it had been assembled from 17 different machines. Our latest project, Danny said, holding it up, atmospheric processor. The original design came from a Sindari garbage barge. Your people threw it out because the filters were clogged. Melian recognized the device. It was indeed Sindari technology, about 200 years obsolete. Those filters cannot be cleaned. The manufacturing process creates permanent bonding at the molecular level. Right, Danny grinned. So we didn't clean them. We replaced them with human-made alternatives. Cotton fiber and activated charcoal. Works even better than the original. That's not possible. You keep saying that. And yet, Danny gestured at the settlement around them. Here we are. Melian's inspection took 3 days. She documented everything. The reclaimed power cells, the biological soil treatment, the repair techniques that used simple materials to replace complex components, the trading network that had humans accepting payment in scrap metal and broken machinery. That on the third night, she found old Patel sitting on a hill overlooking the settlement. The old man was watching the stars through a gap in the clouds. You're going to report that we're thriving, Patel said without turning around. I'm going to report what I observed. And what did you observe? Melian sat down beside him, something she never would have done with a member of her own species. But humans had strange customs about personal space, and she found herself adapting. I observed impossibilities, she said. Your species was classified as primitive. You have no advanced manufacturing, no quantum computing, no faster-than-light communication. By every standard measure, you should not be able to accomplish what you've accomplished. Patel chuckled. Standard measures. That's the problem, isn't it? You measure value by complexity. We measure it by function. I don't understand. A power cell running at 90% efficiency is considered perfect. When it drops to 89%, you throw it away. But 89% is still 89%. The cell still works. It still provides power. The only thing that changed is your perception of its value. But the efficiency loss represents wasted potential. Wasted potential? Patel laughed again. My people were told we were wasted potential. Too primitive to join your consortium. Too poor to be worth saving. We were thrown away just like those power cells. Melian had no response to that. But here's the secret your species never learned, Patel continued. Nothing is worthless. Everything has value. You just have to be stubborn enough to find it. The inspection report sat unfinished in Melian's shuttle. She knew what she was supposed to write. Humans had failed to establish viable settlement. Recommend reclamation of territory. Standard bureaucratic language for standard bureaucratic death. But that wasn't what she had seen. She had seen a species that refused to die. A species that looked at garbage and saw gold. A species that measured value not by what something could be at its best, but by what it could still do at its worst. Melian started writing. Not the report her superiors wanted. The report they needed. The humans of Dust, 7 weren't just surviving. They were solving problems that the consortium had spent centuries ignoring. And if anyone bothered to pay attention, they might just change everything. She titled the document, Preliminary Assessment of Human Innovation Potential. Then she sent it to everyone she knew. The delegation from the Sindari Trade Council arrived in ships that cost more than Penny Station's entire economy. Grand Merchant Solace stepped onto the landing pad, wearing robes that contained more computing power than humanity's original colony ship. He looked at the ramshackle settlement around him and felt nothing but confusion. This place was making him rich, and he couldn't understand why 0.3 years had passed since the humans settled on Dust 7. In that time, they had established trade relationships with 17 different species, processed over 40 million tons of discarded materials, and somehow generated a positive cash flow from nothing but garbage. Solace had come to understand how. His accountants were losing sleep over the numbers. Grand Merchant Riku greeted him at the pad, now 20 years old and fluent in 4 galactic languages. Welcome to Penny Station. I'll be your guide today. I don't need a guide. I need an explanation. Riku smiled. It was the same smile her mentor Danny had taught her, the one that said, I know something you don't. Then let me explain while we walk. The tour took them through what humans called the sorting district. Massive warehouses held mountains of materials that other species had paid humans to take away. Broken machines, depleted fuel cells, contaminated metals, failed experiments, the trash of a dozen civilizations. We call it the input stream, Riku explained. Everything that comes and gets categorized, assessed, and assigned a potential value. Potential value. Solace nearly laughed. These are waste materials. Their value is negative. That's why we pay you to take them. With respect, Grand Merchant, you pay us because you've decided they're worthless. But you're wrong. She led him to a processing facility where human workers were disassembling a Sindari communication array. The device was 3 centuries old, long obsolete, and had been dumped on Dust 7 as part of a scheduled disposal shipment. This array, Riku said, contains 47 kilograms of refined crystal substrate, 16 kilograms of gold tray circuitry, and 2 kilograms of quantum-stable platinum. Your disposal contractors charge you to haul it away. We're about to sell those materials back to your manufacturing sector at market rates. Solace did the math in his head. The numbers were obscene. That's not possible. The cost of extraction alone would exceed the material value. For you, maybe, you'd use automated precision tools, clean room facilities, specialized labor. We use hand tools, open air, and patience. Rika picked up a component from the array. Your machines can do this in an hour, but cost a fortune to build and maintain. Our hand can do it in a day, but cost nothing except time. Time has value, not when your people have nowhere else to be. The tour continued. Sala saw humans repairing devices that the consortium had written off as unrepairable. He saw them adapting obsolete technology for new purposes. He saw them teaching alien workers how to do the same, spreading their philosophy like a slow-moving virus. By midday, he had calculated that Penny Station was processing materials worth approximately 3 billion credits annually. They were doing it with hand tools and determination. You're breaking the economy, Solace said finally. Do you understand that? If every species adopted your methods, the entire galactic trade system would collapse. Riku stopped walking. For the first time, her smile faded. Would that be bad? Of course it would be bad. Trillions of credits would vanish. Manufacturing sectors would fail. Unemployment would skyrocket. Your economy is built on waste, Riku said quietly. You throw away things that work because new things are shinier. You classify entire species as worthless because they don't meet your standards. You've built wealth on the backs of the things you discard. She gestured at the settlement around them. We were discarded. This planet was discarded. Everything here was considered worthless by your standards. And yet here we are, proving you wrong every single day. Solace had no response. That evening, he met with Danny Reyes and Old Patel in a conference room that had been built from salvaged ship panels. The walls didn't quite match, and he could see the welds where different metals had been joined together. It was ugly and functional like everything else humans built. You have two choices, Danny said without preamble. You could try to crush us, embargo our trade routes, pressure our partners, make it impossible for us to operate. It might work. We're small enough that you could probably destroy us if you really wanted to. And my other choice, invest in us. Solace leaned back in his chair. You want me to fund my own destruction? We want you to fund evolution. Old Patel spoke for the first time. Your economy rewards waste because waste drives consumption. Our economy rewards conservation because conservation drives survival. Eventually, one system will win. The only question is whether you want to be on the winning side. What makes you think your system will win? Patel smiled. It was the expression of a man who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Because garbage piles up forever. It never goes away. And eventually, there will be more garbage than there is anything else. When that happens, whoever knows how to use the garbage will own everything. Solace left Penny Station that night with a decision to make. Behind him, humans kept working, turning nothing into something, one piece of garbage at a time, that he thought about the derelict fleet everyone was chasing in the dead zones. Ancient ships from a collapsed empire. Every major power wanted them for the technology they might contain, but humans, he realized, would want them for something else entirely. They would want them for the parts. The dead zones earned their name honestly. 300 years ago, the Valori Empire had fought a civil war that ended with both sides destroying each other completely. What remained was a graveyard of ships, stations, and broken dreams, all floating in a region of space so irradiated that modern vessels couldn't survive the journey. 3 galactic powers had tried to reach the derelict fleet. The Sindari sent automated probes that melted before they could transmit data. The Kelori sent shielded cruisers that returned with crews too sick to stand. The Torati sent nothing at all, preferring to wait for someone else to solve the problem first. Then the humans volunteered. You're insane, Melian said when she heard the proposal. She had resigned from the Sindari bureaucracy 6 months ago to serve as humanity's advocate in galactic councils. It was the strangest career move she had ever made, and she didn't regret a moment of it. The radiation levels in the dead zones will destroy any ship that enters. Any modern ship, Danny corrected. She was standing in front of a holographic display showing the cobbled-together fleet that humans had assembled. 17 vessels, none of them matching, all of them held together by welding and willpower. Our ships are different. Different how? They're built to be fixed. The explanation took an hour. Modern galactic vessels were marvels of automation. Self-repairing hulls, adaptive shielding, predictive maintenance systems that detected problems before they occurred. They were magnificent machines that worked perfectly until they didn't, at which point they became expensive coffins. Human ships were ugly. Their systems were simple. Their components were interchangeable. Nothing about them was elegant or efficient or particularly advanced. But when something broke, any crew member could repair it with basic tools and salvage parts. The radiation will damage your systems constantly, Melian argued. Yes, and we'll fix them constantly. We have enough spare parts to rebuild each ship 17 times over. Your crews will get sick. We've developed shielding protocols using layered lead salvage from the sorting district. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for short exposures. This is a suicide mission. Danny smiled. People have been saying that about humanity for 6 years now. We're still here. The fleet launched on a Tuesday. Rick has stayed behind to manage diplomatic communications, which are becoming increasingly hostile. Several galactic powers had filed formal protests against humanity's salvage claim. They argued that primitives had no right to advanced technology, that the Valori artifacts belonged to civilized species, the humans were overstepping their place. Old Patel handled the communications with characteristic calm. We're not claiming the technology, he told the council. We're claiming the scrap metal. If you want, you can have whatever's left after we're done. Nobody knew how to respond to that. The journey through the dead zones took 3 weeks. Every day brought new failures. Radiation ate through power conduits, shorted out navigation systems, corrupted data storage. Every night brought human crews working by emergency lighting, replacing damaged components with spares, improvising solutions to problems that had never been encountered before. Danny barely slept. She moved from ship to ship via emergency shuttles, helping wherever help was needed, teaching whatever needed to be taught. Her hands were burned from hot welds and cut from sharp metal, but she kept working. Why do you do this? A young crew member asked her one night. He was 19 years old and had been born on Penny Station, part of the first generation of humans who had never known Earth. Because someone has to. But why you specifically? Danny thought about the question. When I was young, back on Earth, I fixed machines because it was my job. Then I fixed them because it was necessary. Now I fix them because it's who I am. I look at broken things and I see potential. I can't look away. The derelict fleet appeared on sensors at dawn on the 23rd day. Thousands of ships, ranging from fighters to dreadnoughts, all frozen in the positions where they had died 3 centuries ago. The battle damage was still visible. Weapons fire had torn through hulls, vented atmospheres, killed crews by the millions. But the ships themselves were intact. My God, someone whispered over the communication channel. Danny understood the reaction. These weren't just vessels. They were artifacts of a lost civilization, preserved in the vacuum of space. The technology they contained could reshape galactic society. Any species that claimed them would become a superpower overnight. Focus, she said. We're not here for the weapons. We're not here for the computers. We're here for the archives. The Valori had been scholars before they were warriors. Their ships contained not just technology, but knowledge. Maintenance manuals, engineering texts, educational materials. The accumulated wisdom of a species that had mastered the art of building things that lasted. That was what humans wanted. Not power, but understanding. Not weapons, but tools. The salvage operation took 4 months. Humans crawled through ancient corridors, carefully documenting everything they found. They took some technology, yes, but mostly they copied data. Libraries of information about how to build, how to repair, how to maintain. Knowledge that the modern galaxy had forgotten in its rush toward disposable perfection. When they finally returned to Penny Station, Danny carried a single data crystal in her pocket. It contained more than technology. It contained proof that the Valori Empire hadn't fallen to external enemies. They had collapsed because they forgot how to fix their own machines. The automation had become so advanced, so perfect, that no one needed to understand it anymore. When it finally failed, catastrophically and simultaneously, there was no one left who knew how to turn the lights back on. Danny looked at the crystal and thought about the glittering capital worlds of the consortium with their perfect machines and their disposable everything. Then she started making copies. The Galactic Council chambers were designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings displayed real-time images of distant stars. Floating platforms held delegates from 100 species. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that only unlimited wealth could achieve. Grand Merchant Solace stood at the central podium, presenting his case against humanity. They have violated 17 separate trade regulations, he announced, his voice amplified to fill the vast space. They have destabilized commodity markets across 4 sectors. They have corrupted developing species with their primitive philosophies. And now they have stolen technology from the dead zones that rightfully belongs to the civilized peoples of this galaxy. Old Patel sat in a human delegation section, a small group of chairs at the very back of the chamber. 6 years ago, humans hadn't even been allowed in the building. Now, they were here to answer for their crimes against proper economics that he thought it was funny in a dark sort of way. The consortium demands immediate sanctions, Solace continued. Human salvage operations must be suspended. Human trade partnerships must be reviewed. And the stolen Valori technology must be surrendered to the Council for proper distribution. The chamber hummed with agreement. Most delegates had already made up their minds. Humans were troublemakers. Humans were dangerous. Humans needed to be put back in their place. Then Melian stood up. The Council recognizes Advisor Melian, former Sindari inspector, current human advocate. Thank you. Melian walked to the secondary podium, her movements calm and deliberate. I would like to present evidence that contradicts Grand Merchant Solace's claims. She activated a display showing a map of the Outer Rim territories. Dozens of small settlements were highlighted, most of them belonging to species that the consortium had classified as economically unviable. 6 years ago, these settlements were dying. Their populations were declining. Their economies were collapsing. The consortium had written them off, just as they wrote off humanity. She zoomed in on one settlement after another. Today, every single one of them is thriving. Do you know why? Silence. Because humans taught them how to repair things. The display changed to show trade statistics, economic indicators, population growth. Numbers that told a story of revival, of species that had been given up on finding new reasons to live. Humans didn't keep the Valori knowledge for themselves, Melian continued. They shared it. They established repair academies in every Outer Rim territory that would accept them. They trained local populations in maintenance skills that had been lost for generations. They gave away the very thing that made them valuable. This proves nothing, Solace interrupted. They spread their influence to build an alliance against us. They spread knowledge to help others survive. Melian turned to face him directly. There's a difference, Grand Merchant, though I understand why you might not see it. Old Patel stood. It took him a moment to straighten his aged back, and the chamber fell silent as he made his way to the podium. Humans weren't supposed to address the council directly. But then, humans weren't supposed to do a lot of things. I am 79 years old, he said, his voice quiet but clear. I remember Earth. I remember what it was like to watch a world die because people couldn't agree on how to save it. I remember the last ship leaving, the last 12,000 of us who had anywhere to go. He pulled the leather pouch from his pocket, the same one he had carried for a decade now. These are seeds from Earth, from a planet that no longer exists in any meaningful way. I kept them because I believed that someday, somewhere, they would grow again. He opened the pouch and let a few seeds fall into his palm. They did grow, on a planet you threw away, in soil you poisoned. They grew because we refused to accept that anything was truly worthless. The chamber was utterly silent now. You call us primitive. You call us dangerous. You say we've broken your laws and disrupted your economy. Maybe you're right. Patel closed his hand around the seeds. But let me ask you something. When your perfect machines break, who will fix them? When your automated systems fail, who will know how to restart them? When your disposable civilization runs out of things to dispose of, what will you have left? He looked around the chamber at the gleaming surfaces and floating platforms and self-maintaining technology. The Valori asked themselves the same questions. 300 years ago, right before everything fell apart, a communication alert interrupted the silence. Then another, then 100 more, all arriving simultaneously from across the consortium's core territories. Emergency report from Capital Station, someone announced. Primary power grid experiencing cascade failures. Cause unknown. Repair estimates unavailable. Emergency report from Commerce Hub 7. Amosefit Hosens fine. Automated diagnostics, non-functional. Emergency report from Administrative Center. Life support fluctuating. Technical staff unable to diagnose problem. The reports kept coming, one after another, from every major population center in the consortium's heart. Systems that had worked perfectly for centuries were suddenly failing, all at once, as if some invisible timer had finally run out. Solace stared at his communication device with growing horror. This is impossible. These systems are self-maintaining. They don't just fail. Everything fails eventually, old Patel said quietly. The only question is whether anyone remembers how to fix it. He looked at Danny, who had entered the chamber through a side door. She was carrying a toolkit and wearing her work clothes, the same ones she'd worn when they first arrived on Dust, 6 years ago. I believe, Patel said, that you're going to need our help. The chamber erupted into chaos. But in the human delegation section, 12,000 survivors of a dead world sat quietly and waited. They had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The capital world of the Sindari Consortium had been dark for 72 hours when the human ships arrived. From orbit, the planet looked wrong. Cities that should have blazed with light were black patches against the landscape. Transportation networks had frozen in place. Communication towers had gone silent. Billions of citizens waited in their homes, unable to do anything except hope that someone, somewhere, knew how to turn the machines back on. Nobody did. That was the problem. For 300 years, the consortium had built an economy based on replacement. When something broke, you threw it away and bought a new one. When technology became obsolete, you upgraded. When systems failed, you called a technician who would install fresh components manufactured by automated factories. But now the factories weren't working. The technicians had no components to install, and nobody, in all the gleaming perfection of consortium civilization, remembered how to fix anything by hand, except the humans. Danny Reyes led the first repair team into the capital's primary power distribution center. The facility was massive, a cathedral of technology that had hummed with energy for centuries. Now it sat dead and cold, its diagnostic systems displaying errors that nobody understood. Where do we start? Asked the Sindari official who had been assigned to guide them. His name was Administrator Van, and he had spent his entire career pushing papers and approving budgets. The actual workings of the systems he oversaw were a mystery to him. We start by looking, Danny said. She pulled out a flashlight and began walking along the rows of silent machinery. Every system has inputs and outputs. Power goes in, power comes out. When it stops coming out, something in the middle has failed. Yes, but which something? There are millions of components in this facility alone. Then we check them one at a time. It took 4 hours to find the first problem. A cooling unit had failed, causing a thermal cascade that shut down 3 processing nodes, which triggered safety protocols that disabled the entire grid. The original failure was laughably simple. A filter had clogged. Danny held up the filter for Ven to see. This is it. This is what brought down your power grid. A piece of metal mesh that got dirty. But the maintenance systems should have cleaned it automatically. The maintenance systems are part of the grid. When the grid went down, they went down too. It's a closed loop. The system can't fix itself because the thing that fixes things is broken. Then how do we fix it? Danny smiled. We clean the filter by hand. Then we restart the cooling unit manually. Then we bring the processing nodes back online one at a time, checking each one before moving to the next. It'll take days, maybe weeks, but it'll work. We don't have weeks. People are dying. Then we'd better get started. The repair effort spread across the consortium like a slow-moving wave. Human teams traveled to every affected world, working alongside local populations to identify problems and implement solutions. They brought their toolkits and their knowledge and their stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly beyond repair. But more importantly, they brought teachers. Riku established training centers in every major city. She taught basic electronics, mechanical principles, diagnostic reasoning. She showed people how to use their hands, how to think through problems, how to fix things instead of replacing them. This isn't just about the current crisis, she told a class of Sundari students on the third day. This is about making sure it never happens again. You need to understand your own systems. You need to be able to maintain them yourselves. We won't always be here to help. Old Patel, meanwhile, had found his way to the capital's failed agricultural district. The automated farms had stopped producing food when the power failed. Without intervention, millions would starve within weeks. He looked at the dead hydroponic systems and the silent processing plants. Then he opened his leather pouch and let the earth's seeds fall into his palm. "We don't need the machines," he told the frightened farmers who had gathered around him. "We need dirt. We need water. We need sunlight. Everything else is optional." They thought he was crazy. A week later, the first green shoots pushed up through soil that the farmers had prepared by hand, using techniques that hadn't been practiced in the consortium for centuries. The crisis lasted 3 months. During that time, humans worked alongside aliens on every affected world, restoring systems and training replacements. They didn't charge for their labor. They didn't demand political concessions. They simply helped because helping was what they did. Grand Merchant Solace found Danny on the day the capital's power grid finally came back online. She was sitting on a rooftop, watching the city lights flicker to life for the first time in 90 days. "Why?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "After everything we did to you, after we rejected you, abandoned you, tried to destroy you, why did you save us?" Danny reached in her pocket and pulled out a small copper disc. It was worn and tarnished, barely recognizable as currency anymore. "Do you know what this is? A coin of some kind? A penny. Earth currency. It was worth almost nothing even before we left. I've carried it for 10 years because it reminds me of something important." "What?" "That value isn't about what something can buy. It's about what something means." She turned the penny over in her fingers. "Your people threw us away. You said we were worthless. But we weren't worthless. We were just different. We measured value differently than you did." She handed him the penny. "Keep it. Maybe it'll help you remember." Solace looked at the tiny copper disc in his palm. Then he looked at the city lights spreading across the landscape, turned on by human hands that his own people had once dismissed as primitive. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you learn. Now you rebuild. Now you start measuring value by what things do instead of what they cost." Danny stood up and stretched her tired muscles. "And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll figure out what we figured out a long time ago." "What's that?" She smiled. "That nothing is worthless. That everything can be fixed. And that the real treasure isn't the shiny stuff you keep. It's the broken stuff you learn to repair." Far below, the city hummed back to life. And somewhere in the hollow rim, on a planet that had once been called worthless, 12,000 humans continued their work. Building, teaching, repairing, growing, turning pennies into stars, point one broken thing at a time.